Good day. It is often the case in world affairs and in human history that an event which is subsequently known to be of key and seminal importance passes by unnoticed at the time when it happens. And I think a meeting which took place in May 2021 falls fully into that category. Now, May 2021 will be seen as a month where many important and dramatic events took place. Firstly, there was a major upward spike of the conflict in the Middle East with armed clashes in Jerusalem, spilling over into further clashes in cities across Israel, and fighting between Hamas and the Israeli defense, the Israeli military in Gaza and in other parts of the occupied territories. That clash ended in a ceasefire, which Hamas, with some justice, has spun as a major political victory. Then, of course, we've had the other events, like the somewhat bizarre affair of the Ryanair flight, which landed in Minsk on its way to Vilnius in Lithuania, allowing the Belarusian authorities to arrest the protest leader Roman Protasevich. We've also had the announcement of the summit meeting between President Biden and President Putin, which I discussed in an extensive and very long program, which I did for this channel the other day. And of course, we have the continuing, seemingly unending saga of events in the European Council, where both the European Union and Germany wait anxiously for the final departure of German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Lastly, we've had the decision by the United States to waive sanctions on Russia's Nord Stream 2 pipeline to Germany, in effect giving the green light for that pipeline to be completed, which the Russians have indicated they expect will happen by sometime in September. So these are all big events, and of course, one can add events which have taken place domestically in various countries. The political situation in the United States remains extremely busy and heated, and the same, by the way, is true in Britain also, where there has been or is being a sustained attempt to dethrone the Prime Minister Boris Johnson um, on the basis of his mishandling or alleged mishandling of the pandemic crisis. So all of these events have taken place, but in my opinion, the most important event of all, the one which, as I said, future historians are going to be most interested in, is one which has gone entirely unremarked. That is the visit of Yang Jiechi, a senior member of China's Politburo and the head of the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party's international department, and therefore President Xi Jinping's top foreign affairs and national security advisor, to Moscow, where he held extensive talks with the Russian leadership. Now, Yang Jiechi is an interesting personality. He is someone who, as I understand it, speaks fluent English and who, for a time, was China's point man in building up relations with the United States. He was for a long time considered to be someone who supported a pro-Western orientation in China's foreign policy. At least that was the perception of him in the West. That perception has turned out to be completely and radically wrong. But Yang Jiechi is not a supporter of any particular orientation for China. He is and has emerged as a strong defender of China's interests and of its overall foreign policy. He was also the official who, along with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, confronted US Secretary of State Antony Blinken at an ill-starred summit meeting in Anchorage, Alaska, in which he took the lead in countering and indeed humiliating Antony Blinken after Blinken attempted to put the Chinese on the spot over China's human rights violations, or perhaps I should say alleged human rights violations. His speech at that summit meeting, which was broadcast around the world, was seen as a moment of humiliation for Blinken and for the United States, and has gained enormous traction in the Chinese-speaking world. So Yang Jiechi is an important and strong-minded official, somebody to be taken extremely seriously. His arrival in Moscow, moreover, is intended to be a part of an ongoing dialogue between China and Russia on security matters. The Chinese and Russian national security advisors, of whom Yang Jiechi is now one, meet regularly every year, and this meeting that has just taken place following Yang Jiechi's visit to Moscow is the 15th one in this cycle. His main interlocutor over the course of these meetings is the Secretary of Russia's Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, who plays a similar role to Yang Jiechi within the Russian power structure, and who is known to be President Putin's national security advisor. Patrushev, by the way, has an intelligence background, and unlike Yang Jiechi, has always been known to be a strong hardliner in terms of Russia's relations with the West. He is also the person who has had recently a series of meetings with President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, including a recent one-to-one meeting in Geneva, which has cleared the way for that summit meeting between the two presidents, President Putin and President Biden, which is due to take place in Geneva in 2 weeks' time. So this is, on the face of it, a meeting of two very strong, very important people. Yang Jiechi, the National Security Advisor of President Xi of China, and Nikolai Patrushev, the National Security Advisor of President Putin of Russia. Now, it is very tempting, and I am sure that many people around the world assume that the primary purpose of Yang Jiechi's visit to Moscow was for the Russians to brief him about the forthcoming meeting between Putin and Biden in Geneva. And I have no doubt at all that that was part of the purpose of this visit. The Russians will have wanted to keep the Chinese fully informed about what is going to happen between them and the Americans in Geneva in 2 weeks' time. And we can be sure that the Chinese are always and continuously being kept fully abreast of all the discussions and of all the talks that are going on between the Americans and the Russians. The Chinese, obviously, will be seeking assurances, which the Russians undoubtedly are giving, that China's interests will be looked after by the Russians over the course of these discussions. And it is also undoubtedly the case that a meeting between the Russian leadership and a senior member of China's Politburo at this time, in advance of that meeting in Geneva, is useful. It gives the Russians an opportunity to brief a top Chinese official close to Xi Jinping in private, in person, in a way which, by avoiding electronic means of communications, telephones, emails, and the rest, is absolutely hack-proof, and which the United States can't thereby get any information about. So, undoubtedly, the Biden Putin talks will have been discussed over the course of Yang Jiechi's visit. However, that is not the reason, in my opinion, why this meeting is taking place and why it is taking place now. In fact, I'm fairly sure, indeed, to be to say it frankly, absolutely sure, that this visit by Yang Jiechi to Moscow has almost certainly been arranged for a very long time, long before any discussions of a possible meeting between Biden and Putin ever took place. And it's important to mention the context in which this meeting is taking place in the Russian, in terms of the Russian political year, because this time, this period, late May, is the period traditionally when the Russians review their defense budget and spending, when they discuss their arms programs, and when they consider how the Russian armed forces are to be developed over the next year. Uh, President Putin has in fact had 3 days of talks with the top military leadership of Russia and the heads of Russia's defense enterprises, in which he has discussed at great length what the overall direction of Russian military policy. Now, those meetings have not taken place in Moscow. They've taken place principally in Russia's Black Sea resort city of Sochi, where Putin has his summer residence, and a residence, by the way, which is very extensive, conferences facilities, and which is well set up for meetings of this kind, of these conferences of this kind. But nonetheless, it is a fact that Yang Jiechi, being present in Russia at the very time that the Russians are able to discuss the direction of their defense policies, enables a top member of the Chinese leadership to be briefed about Russian defense priorities at precisely the moment when they are being decided, and to be briefed, as I said, in one-to-one discussions. And it is interesting to note that Putin took time off from these important meetings in Sochi to telephone Yang Jiechi in Moscow and to have a readout of his telephone conversation with Yang Jiechi published on the Kremlin website. And I will read out what it says. It's fairly brief. Vladimir Putin had a telephone conversation with member of the political bureau of the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee, Yang Jiechi, who arrived in Moscow on a working visit. The discussion focused on the further development of Russian-Chinese relations, of comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction. The parties emphasized the significant role of the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation between the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China, which will turn 20 this year. Yang Jiechi conveyed a message to Vladimir Putin from General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, reaffirming commitment to the all-round strengthening of bilateral ties. The President of Russia spoke in the same vein and asked Yang Jiechi to pass on his friendly greetings and best wishes to the Chinese President. The leaders will maintain close contact with each other. Vladimir Putin and Yang Jiechi also touched upon several pressing issues on the international agenda. Well, of course, it would be very interesting to know what those several pressing issues are. The readout doesn't tell us, but a good guess would be that the Biden Putin summit meeting, which is due to take place in 2 weeks' time, will have been one of them, along with any number of other issues, the situation in Ukraine, and of course the forthcoming meeting between Putin and President Lukashenko of Belarus, who is also incidentally in Sochi meeting with Putin as I speak. But anyway, the fact is that Yang Jiechi's meetings took place in Moscow, and Patrushev, the secretary of Russia's Security Council, was there to meet him and to hold those discussions with him. Note that from a Russian point of view, an indicator of the importance of these meetings between Patrushev and Yang Jiechi is that Patrushev chose to stay in Moscow, or decided to stay in Moscow, to meet Yang Jiechi. He did not attend those very important meetings between Putin and the heads of the military and the defense ministry and the defense industries in Sochi, as he might otherwise have been expected to do. And in fact, the Security Council, of which Patrushev is the president, and which is the secretary, and which has its own website, has actually published a brief readout of these talks between Patrushev and Yang Jiechi. And here is what it says. I take this readout from the Russian Security Council's website. It's not very long, but it does give a flavor of the kind of discussions which took place. With the participation of a number of ministries and departments of Russia and China, talks took place. The 16th round of Russian-Chinese consultations on strategic issues took place in Moscow. They were held and led by the Secretary of the Security Council of Russia, Nikolai Patrushev, and member of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, head of the Office of the Foreign Affairs Commission of the Central Committee, Yang Jiechi. A wide range of Russian-Chinese relations in various fields, including in the field of military and military technical cooperation, was discussed. Special attention is paid to the interaction between Russia and China in multilateral formats, problems of international and regional security. An exchange of views took place on issues of strategic stability, as well as on the situation in Afghanistan, the Middle East, and the Asia-Pacific region. The sides noted the close or coinciding positions with which Russia and China come out on topical international problems, which ensures tight coordination in the foreign policy sphere. It was emphasized that despite the pandemic, the Russian-Chinese relations of comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction continue to develop steadily in all directions. Nikolai Patrushev and Yang Jiechi reaffirmed their readiness to further build up the entire range of bilateral relations, protect national, regional, and global security, uphold a just world order with the UN in the lead. Now, note a number of rather interesting points here. First of all, there is the confirmation that the Russians and the Chinese engage in tight coordination in the foreign policy sphere, and that their comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction, that's the favored Russian term for their de facto alliance, continues to develop steadily in all directions. And of course, they discussed multilateral issues. They discussed the situation in Afghanistan, the Middle East, the Asia-Pacific region, and though the readout is careful not to mention the fact, Patrushev will have spoken to Yang Jiechi about his discussions with Jake Sullivan and the forthcoming summit between Putin and Biden, and will also, by the way, have shared with Yang Jiechi his opinions and observations about Sullivan, with whom Yang Jiechi has, of course, also had direct contacts. So there is all that. But the real kernel of this is in this paragraph. A wide range of Russian-Chinese relations in various fields, including in the field of military and military technical cooperation, was discussed. And we learn that the various ministries and departments of Russia and China participated in these discussions. So that, I think, provides the clue. In Moscow, Yang Jiechi and Patrushev meet, and they do so in parallel with the discussions that Putin is having in Sochi with the Russian military leadership and the heads of Russia's defense enterprises. And Yang Jiechi brings with him a large group of officials representing various ministries and departments, and he meets Patrushev in Moscow, and Patrushev has with him also heads of various ministries and departments. Obviously, these will include the foreign ministry, but the fact that the key discussions appear to have been on the field of military and military technical cooperation, to my mind, explains the purpose of this visit. The purpose of this visit, the 16th in the series, is to make sure that China's military build-up and Russia's military build-up are coordinated with each other, that the Chinese are fully informed in one-to-one meetings where there is no risk of eavesdropping, that what the Russians plan for their military build-up in the future, what new weapon systems they're bringing into service, what new technologies they're bringing into service. And Yang Jiechi, for his part, will no doubt brief the Russians to some extent of what the Chinese are doing, and will take all this information that the Russians are providing with him back to Beijing, where he will meet with the heads of China's military and China's defense industries, and will brief them about what the Russians are doing. We are seeing military coordination between the Chinese and the Russians taking place at an extraordinarily high level. Moreover, and importantly, it's almost certainly not just a case of the Chinese and the Russians keeping each other informed of their own military plans and strategies. It's almost certainly also the case that they're debating what areas of mutual collaboration in terms of weapons development they can together engage in. We know that does take place to some degree, and the reason we know that is because last year President Putin of Russia confirmed that the Russians have provided technical advice and support to China to assist China to create its early warning system, enabling China to protect itself or to alert itself in the event of an attack, a nuclear attack from the United States. And I suspect that there are lots of other issues where the Chinese and the Russians quietly cooperate on technological and military industrial matters. The Russians are in the process of developing a whole range of new aircraft drones, for example. This is an area of technology in which the Russians had fallen considerably behind, and where the Chinese were well ahead of them. There's no obvious sign that the new Russian drones, which are starting to appear, like the Altius long-range high-altitude drone and the Orion medium range surveillance and attack drone are directly influenced by China or have Chinese technology input, but it would not surprise me at the same time if they did. And of course, the Chinese have had long standing issues developing aircraft engine technology, where the Russians are known to be ahead, and they will also be looking to the Russians for information and perhaps assistance in developing their own air defense missile systems. The Russians are about to bring into service their extremely advanced S-500 anti-ballistic missile, and it's quite likely that the Chinese will want to develop a missile system of analogous performance, and quite probably they will be discussing that with the Russians and seeking Russian advice and help with that. The the fact that Yang Jiechi is in Moscow at the same time that Putin is meeting the defense industry chiefs in Sochi means that if the Chinese have any shopping list of ideas they want to raise with the Russians, they can pass it by Patrushev in Moscow, and Patrushev can immediately convey it to Putin in Sochi, where Sochi can discuss it forthwith and at once with the defense industry chiefs, with the heads of the Russian military present. That gives us an insight of the extent to which cooperation between these two powers, China and Russia, is now taking place. Well, the Chinese also have had quite a lot to say about all of this. And it's interesting that at the same time that the Russians and the Chinese are meeting and are discussing defense and defense industry cooperation in a way that I have just spoken about, the Chinese, through Global Times, have published two very interesting editorials. One is about the United States and its military build-up. And it's useful perhaps to see what this Global Times editorial has to say. It starts, as so many Global Times editorials do about the United States nowadays, with an extremely provocative headline, which reads as follows: US defense budget, a huge bubble ready to burst. And then it goes on to say this is the largest budget with the most shocking national defense expenditure worldwide. It is worth mentioning that the 1.7% increase given by the Democratic government, that's to say the Biden administration, is considered too little by many Republicans. And then it goes on to say, the United States' national defense has in fact gone beyond the traditional military field, pursuing the overflow of various functions to maintain global hegemony. The United States economy is increasingly relying on the hegemony of the US dollar and the country's dominant position in international politics and ideology. The US's super military power has compensated for the weakening of its actual competitiveness in these systems. In the past, US technological leadership and economic advantages were absolute, but now such superiority is shrinking. It is complicated to maintain leadership in those areas, but simple and encouraging to raise military spending. Thus, the US has unrestrainedly let itself stay deformed as a system. This is, however, destined to be very inefficient. It will cause fundamental trouble to the healthy functioning of the international community and disrupt people's traditional sense of national security. And then it goes on to say that Washington has perverted greed for national security. China's rise will definitely have a subversive psychological impact on the United States. If China increases its military expenditure by $1, then the US will increase by a few dollars to maintain the gap with China. It will stop improving infrastructure or expanding people's welfare, but it will be still not even enough to pull all other increased budgets into the defense budget. This is an ambition which is impossible to realize. So, what the Chinese are saying is that the United States is trying to compensate for the fact that its economic leadership, its industrial and technological capacity is flagging, and that it is relying increasingly on the position of the dollar to maintain its world economic supremacy by building up its military forces. As a result of these very large military forces, it is able to coerce other countries into continuing to use the dollar as the reserve currency and to continue to project power. That way, the military aspect of US policy complements the economic one in the sense that the defense budget, in effect, enables the United States to coerce other countries to use the dollar as their reserve currency, whilst using the dollar as a reserve currency enables the United States to sustain its defense budget despite the diminishing competitiveness and declining state of its industrial and technological economy. Quite an interesting view. But then consider what the Chinese are saying, that in order to maintain this, to keep this thing going, as China continues to rise, the United States is trapped into a situation where it has to continue to outspend China. So even and despite the fact that it's able to draw for the time being on the resources provided to it by the reserve position of the dollar, it finds itself in an unwinnable race where if China increases its defense spending by just $1, ultimately the United States has to increase its defense spending even more in order to maintain that lead over China. According to this view, which is the view expressed by Global Times, and which I suspect is the view expressed by China's leadership, the United States has maneuvered itself into an unwinnable race. It must run faster than China to stay ahead, even as it is becoming increasingly exhausted. And sooner or later, it will be unable to maintain that race given China's much greater strength, and it will eventually collapse under the weight of its own exhaustion. But here is the nub of it, because of course it's not just China that the United States has to race against, it is Russia also. And this is what the Global Times editorial has to say about that. The US's more than $700 billion defense budget is a super show for itself and its allies. It aims at intimidating other countries, but it is only useless facing major powers like China and Russia. Even if the United States doubles its defense budget, it cannot form a strategic repressive force against China and Russia as it imagines. Beijing's and Moscow's capacity of resolutely resisting the US in terms of their core interests will only be more sufficient. The big bubble of the US military expenditure will eventually burst. It cannot be a compensation for other declines in US competitiveness for long. Time will prove this. What the Chinese are saying here is that if the United States cannot keep up with China economically and technologically in order to sustain its power, it and cannot do so by trying to compensate for the decline of its economic competitiveness by increasing its defense budget, then the equation of Russia and China together makes that exercise hopeless. The United States can never achieve a defense budget large enough or powerful enough to counter the aggregate military power of China and Russia, however long it spends, however much it spends. The more it spends, the more money it wastes trying to compete with the Chinese and the Russians, the faster it will ultimately engineer its own geopolitical collapse. That's a pretty radical view. The Chinese then followed this up with yet another editorial in Global Times, which is this time specifically about Yang Jiechi's visit to Moscow. And it discusses, again, the nature of the discussions that took place in Moscow, or which are, by the way, still, as far as I know, taking place in Moscow. And it does so at great length, but does so in the context of Chinese-Russian relations. And it says, the title again is interesting. It says, China-Russia ties assure global strategic balance. And it reads as follows. Yang Jiechi, a member of the Political Bureau of the Communist Party of China's Central Committee and director of the Office of Foreign Affairs Commission of the CPC Central Committee, kicked off his visit to Moscow. Yang on Tuesday met Nikolai Patrushev, the Secretary of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, for the 16th round of China-Russia strategic cooperation. And then it goes on to say that the West has paid close attention to this high-level meeting between China and Russia, and connects the recent meeting between US Secretary of State Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, and the summit meeting on 16th June between President Biden and Russian President Putin, to this meeting, trying to figure out the subtle influence between the two groups. In our view, these speculations are just overthinking. The China-Russia comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for a new era, that's what the Russians call it, the Chinese call it, is stable and assured and sees no restricted area or upper limit. The relationship between China and Russia is not only at its best, but has also reached the highest level of equal strategic cooperation between major countries in the world. No plot by any force can weaken the current China-Russian relations. China and Russia have become strategically closer because the US and its main allies' suppression of the two countries. However, The China Russia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership of Coordination for a New Era is way much stronger than such temporary geopolitical dynamics. It has transformed into the cornerstone of both countries' national strategies after 20 years of continuous accumulation and consolidation. The back to back strategic reliance of China and Russia, as well as their intertwined interests, are becoming so increasingly valuable that no equivalent in the world can be exchanged for it. And that is clearly right. It's obvious that the Chinese and the Russians today pursue a relationship that has become so close, so intertwined, that any ideas that people may have in Washington that they can prize it apart is now fruitless. The Chinese and the Russians have found that by cooperating together, they become stronger and they're able to keep the United States and the West at bay. But they've also discovered that by working together in this way, their power enhances immeasurably. The sum of the two is greater than its constituent parts. They can wield and exercise influence and secure their international positions to a much greater extent than would be possible if either of them worked separately from each other. And that is a discovery that they have both made, certainly over the 20 years of interaction that has existed between them, but especially, in my opinion, over the last few years. So, what we have today, and this has been a constant theme of this channel, is a situation where the United States and its alliance now faces off against a Russian-Chinese alliance, because that is what it is in all but name, that is becoming stronger by the day, which is engaging in military, industrial, and technological cooperation, where the political leaderships of the two countries are becoming ever more closely coordinated, and where they each act repeatedly to support each other. And in fact, that is in effect what the Chinese and the Russians are saying. Here are the words about this in this Global Times editorial, with which I'm going to finish this video. The strategic coordination between the two countries, between China and Russia, has penetrated into all aspects of international politics. The approach of the two countries is not for the purpose of challenging any other country. But if the US and its allies pile more pressure than normal on China or Russia, they will definitely witness that the other country is standing with the oppressed country. And the heavier the pressure, the more steadfast the support from the other country will be. Don't speculate as to what extent the firm relationship between China and Russia will deepen and how long it will last. And don't waste effort mulling over a tool with special effects that can drive a wedge between China and Russia. China and Russia have negotiated to resolve all territorial issues. The economies of the two countries are highly complementary. The potential for their official and non-governmental collaboration is limitless. The bilateral strategic cooperation has proved to be very helpful in strengthening each other's status in dealing with the US and the West. The Eurasian colossus of China and Russia, which I talked about in that long video I did about the Biden-Putin summit, is all but formed. And from now on, it will increasingly shape the future of the world. The US is no longer in a position to stop it or to slow it down. If it starts to take measures to try to sabotage it, it will only accelerate it and strengthen it even further. What the United States needs to do instead is to come to proper terms. Well, we shall see. But, as I said, this meeting between Yang Jiechi and Nikolai Patrushev in Moscow, and this interaction between the Russians and the Chinese, at this moment in time, is the single most important event which is taking place in the world today, and it is changing everything. Thank you very much for joining me on this program, again on this complicated subject. I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel. Please also remember to check out our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. And please also remember to check out Alex's channel. Please also check out our other platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble and Odyssey, but especially and above all now, SuperU and Locals. And also, to the extent that you feel that you can, support us by via PayPal, Patreon and Subscribestar. And don't forget also to go to our Discord server and check out our shop and buy yourself the wonderful things you will find there. Our famous magic mugs, our hats, our t-shirts, our sweatshirts, and all the other wonderful things that you will find there. Thank you for joining me for this program, and I look forward to you joining me in future programs. And in the meantime, if you've enjoyed this program, remember to press the like button and to check your subscription to this channel. And have a wonderful day until we speak again.